Hi, everybody, and a very pleasant good evening to you wherever you may be. Lucky Strikes blowing smoke rings at you from the studios of Comfortably Zoned Radio. And it's time for Dodgers baseball, a tale of two cities from Brooklyn to Los Angeles. I'm your host, Peter Trunk, and my co-host is Ron Rabinovitz. Ron, how are you today?
Good, Peter. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, my friend, just fine.
Great.
We have a very special show tonight, a very special guest with us, and I'm going to give it over to my partner here, Ron Rabinovitz. And Ron, please take it away. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Peter. We're very honored to have Bob Kendrick, the president of the Negro League Baseball Museum in Kansas City, Missouri, with us tonight. Bob and I are very dear friends. We've known each other for several years. I've been down there to speak a few times, and Bob and I have also met a number of times up in the Twin Cities. So Bob works with Dr. Raymond Doswell, who is the museum curator, and they've had a long-time partnership. And between the two of them, they've just done a phenomenal job at the museum. So, Bob, welcome to the show. I'm glad you're here. It's an honor to have you with us.
Well, it's an honor to be part of the show. I want to thank you both for having me on.
You're very welcome.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Tell us a little bit about the museum, maybe how it got started and where it's at today and things like that.
Yeah, it's a great story because the story of the museum in some ways, guys, mirrors the story of the Negro Leagues themselves. The Negro Leagues Baseball Museum was founded in a tiny one-room office space here in Kansas City at historic 18th and Vine, the Jazz District, in 1990. At that time, we were in a building called the Lincoln Building, which is directly across from where the museum operates today. And as I mentioned, we occupied a little one-room office, had a conference room table in that office, and guys like the late, great Buck O'Neill and other former Negro Leaguers who were still with us at that time literally took turns paying the rent to keep the little office open. That's how we got started.
Isn't that fabulous? Wow.
Yeah, from that respect, we are as grassroots an organization as you will ever encounter. And quite frankly, guys, no one ever gave the Negro Leagues Museum any chance of succeeding because we were so grassroots. And as you know, most museums start with some kind of endowment in place already to jumpstart its success.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Well, the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, we're so fond of saying we started with a hope and a prayer. But we had a group of very diligent, passionate folks led by Buck O'Neill who believed that this story deserved to be told and that this history deserved to be preserved and celebrated and to educate people about a forgotten chapter of baseball and Americana. And so we embarked on this journey to build this museum, and we went from that one-room office in 1990 to today offering 10,000 square feet of exhibit space that chronicles the story of black baseball in America in general and the professional Negro Leagues specifically, and now getting set to complete a 40-plus thousand square foot expansion of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum into the Paseo YMCA. And the Paseo YMCA
wonderful.
is important because that is the birthplace of the Negro Leagues. That is where the leagues were formed in 1920. It will become the future home of the Buck O'Neill Education and Research Center.
Fabulous. That is so wonderful. Now, are you moving to a different location? Is that what's happening, Bob?
No, we'll keep our current home, the place that you visited so many times.
Right.
We won't leave that space. We're just simply expanding our operations into the old Paseo YMCA to create the Buck O'Neill Education and Research Center and give us a place where we can expand program offerings, new exhibits, and other things that we want to do with that facility. And so it's a wonderful expansion. We're growing. There are so many stories that are yet to be told. And quite frankly, we just don't have enough space to be able to tell those stories. And so it's an exciting time for the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum.
That's so exciting. And, it's something that needs to be told and continually told because the young people today don't know much about it, and a lot of the adults don't know much about it.
No,
and
you're right.
you're right.
Yeah.
I applaud you.
It's so gratifying in some ways, sad in another way, that
Sure.
people who come to see us, this is a brand new history for the more majority of them who come to see us. I think, guys, they come in now with the work that we've done over the last almost 27 years. People come to the museum expecting to meet some pretty good baseball players. And of course, you're going to leave not being disappointed. You're going to meet some of the greatest baseball players to ever put on a uniform. But by the time you walk away from this experience, I think you walk away with an even greater appreciation for just how great this country really is. Because the story of the Negro Leagues could have only happened in America. And so, yes, it is anchored in the ugliness of American segregation, a horrible chapter in this country's history. But out of segregation rose this wonderful story of triumph and conquest. And it's based on one small, simple principle. You won't let me play with you, then I'll just create a league of my own. And when you stop to think about that, even though it was America that was trying to prevent them from sharing in the joys of her so-called national pastime, it was the American spirit that allowed them to persevere and prevail. And so I think that's why the story is so compelling. It is so awe-inspiring, because it is America at her worst, but it's also America at her triumphant best. And so you see the gamut of emotions when people come here, because they leave questioning, why didn't I know this when I was in school? Well, the answer is simple. American historians have done us all a terrible disservice because they kept this amazing chapter of baseball and Americana away from us. So it was like it never happened. And we're here to tell you that it did happen. And not only did it happen in grandeur and splendor. And so people are absolutely tremendously moved by this experience.
It's fabulous, Bob. It really is. I've been there several times, Peter, and I can tell you it's the most awesome thing. It's so educating. I was there a few years ago. It was a Buck O'Neill Batwood tournament. And Buck O'Neill was still alive then, and I got a chance to visit with him and some of the other Negro League players. It was a thrill of a lifetime just to talk to Buck O'Neill, to sit down and visit with him. He was the greatest ambassador to baseball that I can remember. The way he could talk about the game. And I think it was an anniversary yesterday, wasn't it? That he was the first Negro first African American coach to put on a uniform and coach for the Chicago Cubs.
Yeah,
I think that was an anniversary yesterday, right?
Absolutely. May 29th, 1962, the Cubs named Buck O'Neill the major's first African-American coach. And so he broke barriers himself. And Ron, you're absolutely right. He was, I think, one of the most amazing human beings who ever walked the face of this earth, who just happened to be a great baseball player. But his contributions to our sport, his contributions to our society are things that have touched a lot of people. And we're so proud that people still remember Buck some 11 years after his passing. And so
unbelievable.
His spirit is very much alive here, and we certainly want to do everything we can possibly do to continue to perpetuate the legacy of the great Buck O'Neill.
Great. I'm frustrated too, Bob, because he's not in the Hall of Fame. They've got a statue outside, but that's it. I mean, he should be in the Hall of Fame. His numbers were tremendous, and there were other Negro League players that are in the Hall of Fame. And not only was he a great player, but he was such a great ambassador for baseball. Yeah. It really frustrates me that he's not in the Hall of Fame.
Well, I think, Ron, there are a lot of people, me included, who share your level of frustration. And we were also disappointed when Buck did not get in 2006, when 17 other Negro Leaguers were inducted, and Buck O'Neill and the late, great Minnie Minoso, who were the only two guys that were alive on this list of consideration of Negro League players of consideration for the Hall of Fame. And sadly, both were omitted, and it was devastating to a lot of us. And of course, Buck handled it so beautifully. so gracefully. In the midst of great disappointment, he stood tall and, basically implored all of us not to be angry and not to be bitter. And I'm still working on that. I ain't Buck-like yet. I'm trying to get there. I still get a little upset when I think about what happened in 2006. But he somehow managed to find joy in the midst of despair. And he was always that consummate glass half full kind of guy. And so I guess it shouldn't have been a surprise to me that he would handle the disappointment of not getting in so graciously, because that's what he had done all of his life. But we all thought that Buck was going to get in. There was no doubt in our minds that Buck O'Neil was going to be a Hall of Famer. And as fate would have it, he comes up a single vote shy from everything that we know about the process. And so it was a devastating day for all of us. It was a very emotional day that day in February of 2006 when so many had gathered here at the museum for what we all thought was going to be a Hall of Fame celebration announcement. And when the word came that he didn't get in, it was like, someone had knocked all of the wind out of our sails. It was emotional. People were openly tearful. And then there goes Buck coming up to the podium and essentially wrapping his arms around all of us. So instead of us consoling him, he was consoling all of us, which honestly I think was one of the most amazing displays of strength of character that I had ever seen in my life. And then he would go to Cooperstown, deliver this impassioned speech on behalf of 17 dead folks who didn't have a voice. They had no voice. Buck became their voice. And again, I think it was one of the most selfless acts in American sports history. And then just a little over 2 months later, he passed away himself at age 94, a month shy of his 95th birthday.
Wow, he would have been somebody. Now, I know that you drove him around a lot. And I remember sitting in St. Paul with Steve Winfield, Dave's brother, and Frank White and myself and somebody else. And you told stories. I could have stayed there till 3 a.m. It was so fascinating because you tell stories like Buck does. I'd love you to share some of those stories with us because they were phenomenal, and I think Peter would love them too.
I would.
Well, the thing about, and one of the things that Buck obviously did, and he did it as well as anybody ever did it, was I think he was the best baseball storyteller, bar none. And for me to be there in his midst, to be there for the ride, to hear so many of these stories firsthand, and now to have an opportunity to share them with visitors when they come to see the Negro Leagues Museum or when I'm on the road speaking to folks is something that I take to heart because I think in a lot of ways, Ron, it keeps him alive in my mind and in my heart by sharing the same stories that he shared with me and having been there and witnessed the joy that he had, the unbridled joy of meeting people, many for the first time, and then seeing, those folks' lives change by a chance encounter with Buck O'Neil. So you knew that you were in the presence of someone special. It was something that was so unassuming for him. He was just being Buck. But you got the impression that old Buck was put here for a purpose, and he identified that purpose. He lived out that purpose. And as a result, all of us who were touched by Buck were better as a result of. But so many great stories. He tells a wonderful story of playing with Satchel Paige, and they're playing in the old Denver Post tournament. And so Satchel had his Satchel Paige All-Stars, and Buck is playing first base with Satchel and his All-Stars, and they're playing an all-white semi-pro team from the Coors Brewing Company. So Buck says Satchel's on the mound, and the first kid gets into the batter's box. He digs in, and Satchel throws him a fastball. Kid swung as hard as he could, topped it, dribbled it down the third base line. It stays fair. He beats it out, gets an infield hit. Well, Buck says about that time, one of the kids from the Coors dugout, steps out on top of the dugout steps, and he yells out, "Let's beat him. He ain't nothing but an overrated darky." Well, Satchel's nickname for Buck famously was Nancy, which is a whole nother story. But anyway, Satchel looks over at first base and he says, Nancy, did you hear that? Buck said, yes, Satchel, I heard him. He said, Nancy, bring him in. And so Buck says he turns at first base, guys, and he motions for the outfield to take a couple of steps in. Satchel looks over at first base. He says, Nancy, bring them all the way in. Honest to God's truth. There were 7 guys kneeling around the mound. Satchel Paige and the catcher, and Satchel strikes out the side on 9 straight pitches. He looks into the Coors dugout and he says, overrated Darky Hay. And, of course, by now, Buck said the kid that had said this was crying. He was embarrassed. All the guys came out to apologize to Satchel and his teammates. But Buck swore to the day he died, if he had one game to win and any choice of any pitcher from any era, it would be the legendary Leroy Satchel Paige. He said you might beat him when he was out there messing around, but when he was locked and loaded, forget about it. And I've heard guys who faced Paige in his prime, and they will tell you that if anybody tells you they saw his fastball in the hitting zone, they lied. And so you saw it leave his hand, but by the time they got into the hitting zone, it had literally disappeared. You know, and so the stories are just so plentiful, and like I said, no one can tell them quite like Buck, but we certainly do our very best. Storytelling, number one, is a big part of the African-American experience anyway. And traditionally, because the African-American story has not been fully documented in the pages of American history books, that is how it was passed down from generation to generation. And so the Negro Leagues lends itself beautifully to the art of storytelling. And like I said, no one could spin a yarn quite the way that Buck O'Neil could. And so even as we present this story here in Kansas City at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, we all incorporate a bit of storytelling as we introduce and educate people about this great history. And, you know, truth is much better than fiction. There ain't no doubt about it. I mean, the stories, you don't have to fictionalize these stories to make them entertaining. I'm reminded of Satchel playing for the House of David. And, of course, for those who might not be familiar with the House of David, the House of David was an all-white semi-pro team based out of Benton Harbor, Michigan. They were characterized by their very long hair and their very long whiskers because they were mimicking David from the Bible, and then they used baseball to spread their gospel. Well, they play a great role in this story of the Negro Leagues because they would barnstorm all over the country playing with and against Negro League teams, most notably the Kansas City Monarchs. Well, one of my favorite House of David stories, 1934, that same Denver Post tournament that Satchel had his Satchel Paige All-Stars in. Well, 34, the Denver Post tournament becomes the first organized baseball tournament to integrate. And the House of David would recruit Satchel Paige to pitch for them. Now, Satchel, wanting to look like his white teammates, dressed in a fake wig and a fake red beard, and would strike out 51 hitters in 3 games. And the House of David would win the $7,500 prize money, and you can best believe that Satchel got a large percentage of that $7,500 prize money. It's a great story because it's indicative of the showmanship of Satchel, but also the tremendous talent of Satchel Paige.
Oh, he was something, yeah. He was a good partier, too. He loved to party.
Oh, yes, Satchel loved to party, like fast cars, and he drove fast. It takes my good friend, the late, great Al Slick Surratt, to talk about Satchel and his driving. And, you know, Satchel really did like to drive fast, and he's going through this Kansas town, and he gets pulled over for speeding, and he goes before the judge, and the judge says, Mr. Paige, your fine is $50. Well, Satchel gives the judge $100. And the judge says, well, Mr. Paige, your fine is only $50. Satchel says, Your Honor, I'm coming back tomorrow. So let me just pay you now. We be done with this.
Bob, I have a couple of questions about the Negro Leagues. Perhaps you can straighten me out.
Okay.
First of all, I've always heard the story, and I believe it's correct, that the Negro Leagues started night baseball. Wasn't there a team that actually traveled with their own lights?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Kansas City Monarchs. J.O. Wilkinson, who owned the Monarchs, pioneered night baseball in the Negro Leagues 5 years before they ever played a night game in the major leagues. Now, again, guys, the history book is going to tell us that the first professional night baseball game took place 1935, Crossley Field, Cincinnati, Ohio, Cincinnati Reds versus Philadelphia Phillies. Well,
right.
The history book is wrong. The first professional night baseball game, 1930, and it featured our very own Kansas City Monarchs. J.O. Wilkinson literally mortgaged everything he had to pioneer night baseball, portable generated light towers. So not only could they play a night game here, but as you alluded to, they could put them on a truck, load them up, and take them all over and play a night game virtually anywhere. And quite frankly, he wasn't doing it to be innovative. He was doing it for survival. See, back then, the Negro Leagues were primarily relegated to playing on Sundays. The Major Leagues didn't really play on Sundays, and so the Negro Leagues would rent the ballpark, play their Sunday doubleheader. Black folks left church, going straight to the ballpark, dressed to the nines, looking good, going to the game. And so Wilkie was looking for a way to get the working class fan into the ballpark. Night baseball became the answer. Night baseball, guys, became bigger than Sunday games. Sunday games were so popular that black churches would move their service time up an hour. Now, I can tell you now, if you know anything about the black church, you don't mess with service time. 11 o'clock Sunday go to meeting. When the Monarchs were home, service started at 10 o'clock, and everybody piled out going to that Sunday doubleheader. Night baseball was even bigger than that.
Wow, that is fabulous.
Another question, Bob. How many games would a team, like let's say the Kansas City Monarchs, in a season of Negro League baseball, official games, how many games would they play in a season?
And it depended on the era, but typically you had a balanced schedule, and they would play their seasons in halves. And so you were probably going to get in that neighborhood of 60, 70 games before it was all said and done during the course of an entire season. And so, but yeah, you normally had 8 teams in one league, 8 teams in the other league, and they pretty much played a balanced schedule over that time.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's a lot.
They had their own All-Star game and they had their own World Series, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Now they didn't hold a World Series every year, but the All-Star game debuted in 1933, the same year as Major League Baseball's All-Star game. Theirs was played primarily at Comiskey Park in Chicago, and yes, it did actually outdraw Major League Baseball's All-Star game. They would put over 50,000 fans in Chicago Comiskey Park for the Negro League's version of the All-Star game, one of the greatest sporting events in American sports history that nobody knows anything about. Yeah, I mean, I can tell you now, to put 50,000 in Comiskey under any circumstances is no joke. That is serious.
Yeah.
And it was almost like it never happened. Nobody ever talked about it. You know, and those are the little nuggets that people gain when they come here, and they're absolutely blown away by the fact that night baseball started in the Negro Leagues. The Negro Leagues All-Star game would attract 50,000-plus fans to come to those games. Advents such as the batting helmet, shin guards, all these things were created in the Negro Leagues. And then you learn that the other dynamics of this story, particularly one point of emphasis that is so oftentimes overlooked, is the economic impact that was created by black baseball. Wherever you had successful black baseball, you had thriving black economies. And so it's so easy to get lost in the romantic nature of these heroic athletes who overcame great adversity to play the game that they love, that we have a tendency to lose sight that this was big business. Now, black owners are making a great living with this game. The players are making a decent living with the game that they so dearly love, but it also spawned these economic opportunities for other black businesses. Negro Leagues Baseball probably had as greater impact in helping the success of other black businesses than any other black business in this country.
Wow.
That's interesting.
Isn't that fabulous?
That's very interesting.
And the great baseball they played. They were tremendous ball players.
Sure.
And that's the other thing. I think a lot of times, Ron, when people come here to the museum, they have a bit of a mindset that if it didn't happen in the major leagues, then it didn't happen. Well, we're here to tell you that it did happen. And I think the most difficult thing for our guests to understand is that there were two professional baseball leagues operating simultaneously to one another.
Right.
One we know everything about, or we've got a place where we can go learn about, the major leagues. The other, the Negro Leagues, gave the best black and Hispanic baseball players an opportunity to showcase their world-class baseball skills as well. So both leagues were professional, but I think the consistent mindset is that for some reason the Negro Leagues were inferior to their major league counterparts, and that's just not true. As a matter of fact, the record books bear out that the Negro League or the black all-star teams won almost 75% of their head-to-head matchups. So for us, it's never been a question about whether or not these men were good enough to play in the major leagues. It was just simply the social conditions of our time and fear that kept them out of the major leagues.
Wow. Unbelievable.
Another question, Bob, if you don't mind.
Go ahead, Pete.
The signing of Jackie in 1945 by Branch Rickey, did that begin the death knell of black Negro League baseball?
Of course. No, absolutely. And there's no and, ifs, buts about it. Robinson was playing here for the great Kansas City Monarchs in 1945 when he was signed away by Branch Rickey into the Dodgers organization. And, of course, as you guys well know, he would spend the 46th season in Montreal in the Dodgers farm system, and then on April 15, 1947, make that monumental walk on the field as a member of the Brooklyn Dodgers, forever changing the game of baseball, but more importantly, forever changing this country. But in the process, it absolutely signaled the end of the Negro Leagues. As a matter of fact, the way we treat Jackie's story here at the museum is that it was the beginning, but also the end. It was the beginning of social change in our country, but it was also spelling the end of the Negro Leagues, as this now opens the door for other young black stars to move into the major leagues or into the major leagues minor league system. Now, this played out over a span of 13 years because it took Major League Baseball 12 years before every major league team had at least one black baseball player. But the handwriting was on the wall. Black owners saw what was coming. They knew the business of black baseball was going to die. So what did they do? They started selling their star players to the major leagues, just trying to get what you could get before this thing dried up. And so, yeah, it certainly signaled the death knell of the Negro Leagues.
Wow. Right. It's so sad because there were so many great ball players that never got to the major leagues. By the time they, like Sam Jeffro and Josh Gibson and some of these guys.
Well, you think about Ron. You think about Ron in your neighborhood in Minneapolis, the great Ray Dandridge. Ray Dandridge was one of the greatest third basemen, perhaps the greatest third baseman to have never played in the major leagues. Well, Dandridge makes it up to the old Minneapolis Millers, which were the New York Giants AAA team at that time. Well, Ray Dandridge is named MVP of the Millers when he was 37, 38 years old. And there was no room in the major leagues for a 37-year-old third baseman, so there was no way he was going to get called up, even though he was out playing those young kids. Ray Dandridge was outstanding. And so you think about the guys that Minneapolis had at that time. They had Ray Dandridge, Willie Mays, and Dave Barnhill was a great pitcher, all playing for that Minneapolis Millers team back then. And, of course, the Giants would eventually call up Mays. Mays was only hitting 477 when they called him up.
That's all? That's all?
and so, yeah, that older black ball player got put out of business. So they would have to go to Canada or back to Latin America if they were going to continue their playing career. So it's bittersweet from that standpoint. Yeah. It was progress, it signaled progress in our country, but it also put a lot of guys out of business. And as we touched on in the opening portion of the show, Buck O'Neil becomes the first black coach in Major League Baseball history 15 years after Jackie. Yeah, so Jackie goes 1947. You don't get your first black coach until 1962. And then you don't get your first black manager until 75, I believe, in Frank Robinson.
Frank Robinson, right?
Yeah, and your first black GM perhaps a year or two after that in Bill Lucas. So the hierarchy of the sport never saw the same results that you saw on the field. This was a very slow process, and still, by today's standards, still very slow in terms of creating those opportunities beyond the playing field. And so, and that's why Buck would talk about the fact that he was very proud of the fact that he was the first black coach in Major League Baseball history. It certainly afforded him an opportunity to improve his livelihood. But as he would say, I can't stick out my chest, when I knew all of these other great baseball minds who were more than capable of waving a guy home or telling him to put on the brakes. But none of those guys really ever got the opportunity. There was so much talent across all fronts in the Negro League, but really only the guys on the field, a select few, got the opportunity to transition into the major leagues.
Right. There was so much, you're right, so much talent. What disturbs me a lot, Bob, is that African-American kids are not playing baseball like they used to. I mean, I think it's less than 7% now.
Yes.
Is the Negro League Museum or is Major League Baseball doing enough? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, what I do, I applaud Major League Baseball because they understand that this is an issue, and they've committed themselves to trying to fix this problem. And because we want all kids to enjoy the greatness of this sport. So anytime that there's a sector of our population that is not getting the opportunity for whatever the reason is, if there's socioeconomic barriers or whatever they might be, it's in common that we try to fix that. Major League Baseball is certainly doing that. And now, that being said, we understand that it's going to take a long time. This problem didn't occur overnight. It won't be fixed overnight. And I think it's important that the African-American community join Major League Baseball in making baseball important to African-American kids again. And once upon a time it was. And these other sports have certainly risen in popularity, basketball and football in particular. Now we see soccer starting to emerge. So there are a lot of ways in which you can make a living professionally. You're not dependent on baseball anymore. And these other sports give the impression of instant wealth. So, we live in a instant gratification society anyway. So that long, arduous road through the minors to the majors doesn't really appeal to a lot of people anymore. But baseball understands that. They are trying to do things to turn those numbers around. Here in Kansas City, we're so proud of the fact that the Kansas City Royals are building an urban youth baseball academy right behind the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. Wonderful collaboration between Major League Baseball, the Players Association, the Kansas City Royals, City of Kansas City, Missouri, State of Missouri, Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, Boys and Girls Club, that will create an opportunity for kids to play this game. So, one of the things that we've identified and worked hard to kind of address is the economic barrier that was preventing kids from playing baseball. So now baseball went from being a blue-collar sport to a country club sport. It's a very expensive sport now. And so
yes, it is.
if nothing else, we are addressing that issue. So if a kid wants to play this game, they will have an opportunity to play this game. Now, if you don't like it, then you don't like it. We understand that. But we wanted to make sure that it wasn't because of an economy of scale that was preventing kids from playing this game. And so I applaud Major League Baseball and of course, all those wonderful people who are working over at the Kansas City Royals for the commitment that they've made for urban kids to have an opportunity to play baseball. The fields will be ready later this summer. We're building an indoor training facility as part of the complex, and it is going to be one of the most amazing complexes in all of baseball. We couldn't be more excited. So the efforts are being put in place to try and reverse these alarming numbers.
Great. That's so nice to hear. It's so good to hear, believe me. It really is. Tell us some more stories about Buck.
But one of my I don't know if you guys have read the book The Soul of Baseball, A Road Trip Through Buck O'Neill's America. It is beautifully written. It was written by the author, great writer, Joe Posnanski, who followed Buck and I the summer of 2005 all over the country. And Joe was basically keeping a diary. But as I tell people all the time, you've got Buck O'Neill, who's one of the greatest human beings to ever walk the face of this earth. You've got Joe Posnanski, who is one of the great writers of any era, 20th, 21st century. So you knew this book was going to be magical, and it was absolutely just that. And
say the name of the book again, Bob, for our audience.
It's called The Soul of Baseball, A Road Trip Through Buck O'Neill's America. It won the Casey Award as the best baseball book of 2008. Sadly, Buck had passed away 2 years before the book was actually published. But the fuel for the book came from really 2005 into 2006 as Joe was following Buck and I all over the country. And one of my favorite stories from the book, we're in New York, and we had ran Buck all over Manhattan that day, and we had gone and done a radio interview with kind of I guess, for lack of a better term, I would call him a hip-hop shock jock, kind of a hip-hop version of Howard Stern. Well, we didn't know this when we arrived at the studio. And so when we get to the studio, the security guard instantly recognizes Buck, and he's really excited. Oh, Mr. O'Neill, so great to see you. What are you doing here? And I said, well, we're going up to do the Star and Buck Wild show. Well, that should have gave me a hint right there. When and so the security guard says, oh, Mr. O'Neill, you don't want to go up there. And so I'm looking at Joe wondering like, oh, man, what in the world have we gotten ourselves into? So we get on, and Buck says, oh, don't worry about it, fellas, we can handle it. And so we get on the elevator, and we go upstairs, and they take us back into their little green room. And the green room is filled, at a radio station, the green room is filled with all these spirits. You got all this alcohol in the green room. I'm like, now I'm really getting nervous. I'm like, oh, my God, what have we got ourselves into? And so we go in, and we meet the young man who is the host, Star. His name is Star. And his sidekick was Buck Wild. And then the other sidekick name was White Trash. I knew we were in trouble now. But the young man was very nice while the light was off. We're off air. He's talking to Buck very respectfully. And then the light comes on, and he starts tearing into Buck about Jackie Robinson, how Jackie Robinson was a sellout, how he sold you guys out, and Buck was trying to be rational with the guy, and the guy just went on and on and on, and finally the interview was over. And when it was over, all these people started calling in because they were mad at the way that this guy went after Buck. And so we get back in the car, and we're going over to Sports Illustrated for Kids, and we do an interview over there, really fun interview with some of the young people over there for Sports Illustrated for Kids. So now we're back in the car, and we're driving back over to the LaGuardia Marriott LaGuardia Hotel. And so me, Joe, and Buck. And so we get in the car, we're on the road, and Joe said, well, Buck, when we get back to the hotel, Bob and I are going to have a little dinner. Are you going to join us? Buck says, no, fellas, I'm beat. I'm bushed. I'm tired. I'm going to go to bed. I'll see y'all in the morning. Well, as we pull up to the Marriott LaGuardia Circular Drive, there's a woman sitting on a concrete bench wearing a beautiful red dress. As Joe would describe it in the book, it is candy apple red. I mean, the kind of red that you can't miss. And so Joe and I get out the car, and we walk into the hotel lobby. We're going to say our, good night to Buck, and we're going to go get something to eat. Well, we turn to say good night to Buck. We can't find Buck. Buck's nowhere to be seen. We go back out. The car is gone. There's no Buck. We look over to the concrete bench, and there's Buck talking to the woman in the red dress. Now, all of a sudden, guys, Buck is totally re-energized. He's laughing. She's laughing. Next thing I know, they hugging one another. A young man comes up and joins them. He gets into the midst, and they all sharing an embrace. Buck walks back into the hotel lobby, and he says, come on, fellas, let's go eat. And Joe looks at Buck, and he looks at Buck, and he says, well, Buck, did you know the woman in the red dress? And Buck utters one of the most prophetic statements ever. He says, son, one thing in this life, you never walk by a red dress. And so and I got to remember that one. I think in some ways it was a metaphor for Buck about life and living and how much people energized him. As much as it was the red dress, but here in Kansas City for his birthday, every year in November, we still celebrate his life, and we encourage the ladies to wear their red dresses, and you would not believe how many women come out wearing their red dress for old Buck as a symbol of that great day in New York when that red dress brought him completely back to life.
He would have loved it. He would have loved it.
That's great.
So fabulous. Great story. Great story.
When Satchel Paige pitched in the major leagues, finally, his first appearance, if I'm correct, was with the St. Louis Browns.
He came to the majors with the Cleveland Indians.
He did.
He joined. All right.
Cleveland. How old did he say he was? And how old was he?
Well, as Buck would say, he was older than that. He claimed to be 42. Major League Baseball says that Page was 42 years old when he joined the Cleveland Indians in 1948 as a rookie. Now, you may recall that in 48, Cleveland wins the World Series. Matter of fact, the last time Cleveland won the World Series was 48 with Satchel Paige, Larry Doby, and the rest of that great pitching staff that they had. Well, Page, whether it was 42 or 52, because most people believe that he was at least 10 years older than what he claimed, and he was still winning. He goes 6-1 with a 2.4 ERA his rookie season. Many thought he should have been named Rookie of the Year at age 42, which means he could have been 52 years old. And I don't know if Bill Veeck knew whether or not the old man still had some gas in the tank. He knew he would be a huge draw. And guys, Bill Veeck was likely the only guy that would have given Satchel an opportunity. The other owners could have so easily just said, well, he's too old. He's too old. Right. We don't have to worry about that. He's too old. But Bill Veeck, whatever the reason was, whether he knew he had some gas in the tank or if he just knew he would be this huge draw, he gave Satchel an opportunity. Well, as it turns out, the old man still had some gas in his tank. His first couple of appearances with the Indians came out of the bullpen. And quite frankly, that is when he gave up most of his runs that year. When the old man took the mound in a starting role, he was lights out. He's in Comiskey Park. I believe his first start was in Comiskey Park. They got 55,000 people in the ballpark. Guys, they had to turn away another 12,000 who wanted to see the old man pitch. He beats the White Sox 5-0. Now they moved back to Cleveland, and if you recall, Cleveland had that huge stadium, old municipal stadium with seats over 90,000.
By the lake.
Absolutely. They had 93,000 plus in the ballpark to see the old man pitch. He beats the White Sox 1-0 again. Larry Doby drives in the winning run, and at that point, the old man was straight up dealing. I can honestly say that there will never be another Satchel Paige, because Satchel has become the standard in which other pitchers are measured. And even as it relates to the Negro League, you'll hear guys all the time saying, well, such and such was as good as Satchel, or his fastball was as fast as Satchel. Well, when you become the guy that everybody else measures up to, you must be pretty special. And Satchel was indeed special. They clocked his fastball at 105 miles per hour. Now, this was well before the advent of the speed gun. This was the military using an old speed tracking device. And truth of the matter is, depending on how it was calibrated, he could have been 3-4 miles faster than what they clocked him at. And so they're in D.C., and the Monarchs are playing the Homestead Grays, and so the kid is timing Satchel, and Satchel's not aware of this. So Satchel retires aside. He walks off the mound. The kid comes over to him, Mr. Page, we clocked your fastball at 105 miles per hour. Satchel looks at the kid and says, I wish I'd known you were timing me. I could have thrown harder than that.
That's so fabulous.
But, the thing that made Satchel so special, and I can tell you now, as you all know, 105 is pretty doggone special. But
pretty doggone special.
Yeah, that's pretty special. But what really made him special, the pinpoint control. He could put it exactly where he wanted to put it, and even as an old man, he never lost that ability not to just throw strikes, but to catch us at the target. He hit the target. He didn't miss. You see, he didn't warm up in the bullpen like most pitchers do, throwing the home plate to the catcher. Satchel would use a stick of foil chewing gum wrapper. The catcher would sit the chewing gum wrapper.
Stick of what?
Top of home chewing gum. A stick of foil chewing gum wrapper.
Okay.
He would take that chewing gum wrapper, the catcher would, and sit it on top of home plate. And wherever the catcher moved that old chewing gum wrapper, Satchel right over the top of that chewing gum wrapper. His control was absolutely amazing. I'm reminded Vin Scully, before he retired, was telling a story that was told to him by Whitey Herzog. And Satchel and Whitey were on the same team at one point in time, I believe. I can't remember if it was St. Louis Browns or not. But anyway, they were playing in a stadium that had a knot hole in it. And the baseball team had a promotion that if anybody hit a ball and it went through the knot hole, they were going to win a prize, something special. And so Whitey and Satchel are in the outfield when Whitey challenges Satchel. He said, well, Satchel, can you throw a ball through that knot hole? Satchel says, will it fit? And they go over, measure, and see that the ball has just enough circumference for the ball to get through the knot hole. Well, Herzog says Satchel takes the ball, he steps back into pitching distance, and he says the first ball that Page throws, the ball goes into the knot hole and spins out. Now, he's in freaking disbelief. He says the next ball, the next pitch, wouldn't you know, goes straight through that knot hole. Only Satchel Paige. Only the immortal Leroy Satchel Paige.
And he was old when he did that.
No, he's old.
He was old when he did that because if he played on the same team as Whitey Herzog, that must have been the Kansas City Athletics. And that was like 1959 or something. So Satchel had to be 60-something.
Well, you have to remember that in
60-something.
in 65, Charlie Finley brought Satchel back to pitch for the Kansas City A's. And, at that time, Satchel is reportedly 59 years old.
Exactly.
If you believe
so
that
he was old guy. He was like 69 or 70.
If you believe that he was born July 7, 1906, which I absolutely do not. But so he's believed to be 59, which means he was closer to 69. And so he pitches 3 shutout innings against the Boston Red Sox, giving up only 1 hit in those 3 innings. A
double to Carl Yastrzemski.
A double to Carl Yastrzemski. Yaz gets a double against the old man. Satchel leaves him at third, shut down everybody else over three of the most amazingly pitched innings in baseball history at age 59, which means he could have been 69 years old. Well, Rico Petrocelli was on that 65 Red Sox team. And he told me, he says, Bob, we all went to the plate hacking away at that old man. They thought they were going to light that old dude up. And he said at that time, Satchel's fastball was still 86, 87 miles an hour, and he is painting the black at age 59, which means he could have been 69 years old. The guy was an absolute freak of nature. Yeah, I mean, that's why I say there will never be another Satchel Paige. There just won't.
No, never. Yeah. He's unbelievable. Unbelievable. This is so fabulous. So fabulous.
Wow. The stories are fantastic. You don't have a Josh Gibson story, do you?
Oh, of course there are Josh Gibson stories.
Well, I got to hear a Josh Gibson story before I thank you and say goodnight. I have to hear something about Josh.
For your audience who might not be familiar with Josh Gibson, you know, next to Satchel Paige, I don't know if there's more legend or lore that surrounds any one guy. He was this gentle giant of a man, tremendously powerful. He was referred oftentimes as the Black Babe Ruth, but there were those who saw Gibson play who called Ruth the White Josh Gibson. Gibson was incredible. In 1936, Josh Gibson hit 84 home runs in a single season in 170.
How many?
84.
How many games?
In 170 games.
Wow.
170 games, he had 84 home runs, and the power was just almost mythical-like. But he wasn't just a great power hitter. Gibson, guys, was a great hitter. Lifetime batting average of 354, and in head-to-head competition against major leaguers, hit over 400. And so he didn't, like most power hitters are free swingers. They strike out a lot. I mean, it actually sickens me that I see these young athletes now. I mean, it's just feast or famine, man. They either going to strike out or they're going to hit the ball out of the ballpark. But that was not Josh Gibson. Gibson, as Buck would say, had Ted Williams kinds of eyes. He put the ball in play, but put it in play with a lot of power. His outs, as they would say, were loud outs. And so the third baseman and the shortstop were damn near in left field when Gibson was at the plate, because you could get killed over there. And so Buck tells a story. He said the Monarchs were playing the Homestead Grays here in Kansas City when a young kid for the Monarchs, he was a rookie with the Monarchs, he walks by the Grays bench and he sees an old broken bat sitting in front of the bench. He picks it up. He decides he's going to tease Josh. He said, Josh, this must be your old broken bat. And Gibson, like any great hitter, was sitting on the bench with that big bat of his. Now, keep in mind, Josh swung a 40-ounce, 41-inch bat. So he's sitting on the bench with that big bat of his, and he turns the bat, and he shows the kid the faded out area on the sweet spot of the bat. And he looks at the kid and says, son, I don't break bats. I wear them out. And so,
I wear them out.
That's fabulous. Well, and he was a great catcher too, wasn't he?
He was a great catcher. And I think that's the one thing that people don't understand. Josh wasn't a good catcher. He was a great catcher. So when you look at what he was able to do, the combination of power and average, and he caught his entire career in the Negro Leagues, there's nobody to compare him to. There really isn't.
No, nobody.
From that, because, you know, catchers don't do that. You're going to get one or the other, power or average, but you really ain't going to get both of them. And Gibson was I think the preeminent combination of power and average with great eyes. He just didn't strike out a lot. Yeah, he just hit everything hard.
Yeah.
You know,
it's a shame he never made it. Yeah.
Campanella coming up was pretty close to. I don't know if he was pretty close to him, but Campanella on his good years would drive in 140 runs and hit 325. Yeah. So Campy was something else too.
The catching position in the Negro Leagues, to be honest, was better than it was in the Major Leagues. They had better catchers in the Negro Leagues. You get guys like the great Raleigh Biz Mackey, who arguably is the greatest defensive catcher this sport has ever seen. He taught Roy Campanella how to catch. And as great as Campy was, Campy never started an East-West All-Star game because he was playing behind Josh Gibson, as great as he was. Yeah, and so that gives you kind of an indication of the talent. And that position really with guys like Louis Santop, Double Duty Radcliffe. There were a lot of great catchers in this league, and that catcher's position really did not transfer over to the major leagues because, again, the belief is that is a cerebral position. And so now you're adhering to the fact that you don't think these guys are smart enough to play that position.
Like a black quarterback.
Exactly. You look at a guy like Elston Howard. Elston Howard was an outfielder when he came to the Monarchs, and the Yankees converted him to the catcher's position, and he becomes a great catcher. But when you're catching behind Yogi Berra, you never gonna get an opportunity to play.
That's right.
You know, and so Ellie wasted all those years in the minor leagues with the Yankees because he couldn't break in front of Yogi Berra. But when he finally got there, he became the heart and soul of some of those Yankee teams. But yeah, he was. Matter of fact, Elston Howard and Ernie Banks were roommates when they played for the Kansas City Monarchs.
No kidding, huh?
Yeah.
Wow. Two great stars.
Oh, major stars. And Ernie said they would sit in the room when they were playing with the Monarchs and talk about who was going to get to the major leagues first.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Yeah.
Such great ball players.
Absolutely.
It's really, it's so much fun to listen to these stories. It's so much fun to bring the Negro Leagues back alive. The way you tell these stories, it's so phenomenal, and I certainly love it, and I appreciate it, and I really honor you and appreciate your friendship, and we've been buddies for a long time, and I hope to come down to Kansas City and speak again. I'd love to do that, and we'll have some more fun when you come up here to Minneapolis.
Well, we're looking forward to seeing you back down here in Kansas City, and I'm certainly looking forward to getting back up to Minneapolis, hopefully sometime soon. The Twins have been
Let me know when.
friends.
Let me know.
I absolutely will keep you posted. Matter of fact, I talked to Frank White here recently, and they want to do something in memory of Campanella. And so I am planning on coming out there later this year, so I'll keep you posted on that.
Great. I talked to Frank about that, too. Yeah. And he was with the St. Paul Saints, with the Dodgers.
Absolutely.
Club.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Peter, you have anything else?
It certainly was a pleasure, Bob. I really enjoyed meeting you over the airwaves like this, and any friend of Ronnie Rabinovitz is a friend of mine, so I count you now as one of my friends, and keep up the good work out there, and especially with that program you were telling us about in conjunction with the Kansas City Royals. It sounds like a real winner. And good luck with it, like I said, and thanks for coming on our show. We appreciate it very much, and we would like to ask you back again whenever you're available to come back and tell us some more stories. We loved it.
Anytime, guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you, buddy. Take care.
All right,
and for the Comfortably Zoned Radio, we're going to sign off now. Thank you, gentlemen, and good night to both of you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Take care. Bye now.